Andy, we're live.
We're live. We're 30 seconds early just to aggravate those people who thought that they were on time.
Exactly.
Today, you and I, Bambos, we're on together with who?
I and you.
You and I
and you with Kerry Magnus, all the way from South Africa, which will make Bulalang very happy.
Yes, we brought on a guest from South Africa because we knew that Bulalang needed some company.
Yeah.
Today, we are going to discuss her journey, and especially one that I find always interesting. It's the moment that we realize that happiness is an inward journey. And we're doing that, Bambos? You and I?
With a deep breath in, Andy.
Wonderful chaos.
Here we are.
Just you and me now. You know that song?
No.
Okay. I'll play it for you. I think it's an 80s song.
That last Friday on our date, you promised to sing. You didn't sing shit.
You're right. Because we discussed Barbra Streisand, and I didn't think of the show tunes that I wanted to pull out. No. I'll go back into the collection and bring something out tomorrow for you, okay?
Please don't.
How are you?
I'm doing good, Andy. How are you?
I'm okay.
I'm happy we got that out of the way.
Yes.
1 second. No listening. Or are you meaning now listening?
I'm not sure. Magdalena says she's not listening. I'm not sure if that means she can't hear us or if she's has to turn on her speakers on her computer, maybe.
The use of emojicons don't always work for us, Magdalena.
You have to be more specific.
We're old school.
Yeah, we're old school. You got to say, I cannot hear you too.
This is an interesting subject.
Yeah.
It's like the moment we discover that there's nothing on the outside that can actually sustain us. And actually that moment where we have to source it all from within.
Yeah.
There's no other human being. There can always be support, but we need to do that work.
Yeah. You know, I think I've often, let's just see quickly before Magda, it's not only you and me now.
I still don't get it.
I think she's referring to the Barbra Streisand song when I said just you and me now. She's getting us. I like this. Thank you, Magda. Getting back to our subject, the moment that we realize that happiness is an inward journey.
You're thinking too much. Do you want to sing what you want to say? Would you like to sing?
I don't know what I'm going to say. I have no damn clue. And yet I see myself struggling to find the words. At the moment, I'm actually feeling how I felt before and after. So I hesitated because I was trying to sense that moment in life when I saw and felt that I needed other people to be different so that I could be happy. And it's not easy to go back to that in myself. I can feel tears come up because it was a very helpless place. And as I was slowing down and feeling it, what I was seeing is that when I lived in that mind space, it was like creativity was almost just shut down.
Zero.
Because in a weird way, it was almost like that was like the limiter. It was like, I need you to be this way, and I'm fixated on that, and I'm so fixated that in a way, I shut down a lot of my my just internal well-being.
The way you said it, though, it sounds very controlling.
Oh, it is totally controlling. I had to go back to my dad relationship because my dad, who was, as we've spoken a lot, bipolar, had chemical imbalances, so often in rages. So I had no control over him. And I was so resentful for his behavior. And it started at such a young age that I created a narration about it. And since it was a narration, it was like in my adulthood, the same narration of the 10-year-old was always being spoken. I mean, I was telling the same stories at 10 as I was at 30.
To justify why you were feeling that way.
Exactly. And why I was the victim. So I was sort of internalizing this victim state. And what I saw, and we spoke about yesterday's show.
Yeah.
And yesterday's show was really when he spoke about living in constant anxiety, and in a way that the resentment came from the anxiety I was feeling. I needed to place blame for that anxiety, and it was placed towards my dad. So that the hesitation earlier was allowing myself. Actually, it's weird. I could throw up. Literally, that's what it feels like.
That way.
Letting the feeling come in actually is like I honestly feel like I could throw up right now. Oh, terrible. No, I may have to get up. That's how letting the feeling in is that visceral for me. Wow. Okay. Whew. I'm gonna just get a tea. You can bring her on. It's hard.
Well, I guess for me, it was a recent experience where I was trying, my business was going down during COVID, and I was looking outside myself to find solutions. And what was happening is everything was coming from fear and nothing was really in flow. And at some point, my heart was beating fast. I was having a contraction. I couldn't breathe. I had to look it up. The symptoms were that of a panic attack. And it was only and when I sat down, I did breath work. I thought Andy brought me tea.
I can get tea.
No, it's good. Sit down, sit down. It was only until I sat down and did some breath work where I finally could detach myself from the story in my mind and get more in my body.
Yeah.
And from there, everything started to feel more expansive.
Yeah.
And even now where things are going really well, I'll find moments where I'll wake up and I'll think that I'm half a year ago.
Yeah.
And then I'll see the thoughts and I'll recognize them, like, oh, wow, it's so easy to go down that rabbit hole again.
Yeah. So easy.
It's almost like the thoughts are addictive.
Yeah, that's the thought. That's the point. So let's bring Kerry on now that we've almost thrown up before she's come on.
Talk about yourself. Hello, Kerry.
Hi.
See what this topic does to us? It's like, if you let the feelings in, it's so nice to talk about feelings remotely, like as if like they're separate from you and you see them in others and you can rationalize. But like, I do like to allow myself to be embodied and feel. But I notice sometimes when you bring them in, they're like, and really bring them in, not head. Like I just felt like I was going to puke. Yeah.
Well, that's what you felt when you were only a little boy. Imagine feeling that as a little boy.
Yeah.
That's why it becomes necessary to disconnect when we're children, if there's no one to help us hold it.
Yeah. And of course, that's what I did, which took so many years to then. And it's funny because as you get older, sometimes you forget about it because it's a distant and it's no longer in your life at the moment. I don't say coming. So I actually have to almost meditate to move back into the same space. And then I'm like, what the hell am I doing here?
Yeah. Why would I want to go back in?
Why would I want to go back there? Yeah,
but it helps you actually, like when I hear you speak, it helped me come back to my feeling, and I saw Kerry nodding also as you were sharing.
Absolutely.
It's a really uncomfortable feeling, and I would even say that if we sustain that feeling, that it's the beginning of dis-ease.
Yeah.
If you sustained it unconsciously, yes. But if you consciously allow yourself to feel it, then you're processing.
Yeah. Thanks for clarifying the difference.
Yeah.
That's the power of embodying it. Yeah.
Yeah, I always find that when I bring it up, it's like I'm allowing it to be, and then it is like there's that. The challenge I think is hard for people to see is that the emotions aren't you; the emotions are there. Yes. So bringing them in is allowing yourself to experience them again, but with another set of kind of call it a meta level. See, you're being and seen, and it's hard. I've often tried to articulate it, like the ability to, like, I always, like, I'm so sick of any individual who preaches and tells other people what they're feeling and how they're feeling, because in a way there's no compassion in it. It's sort of like it takes it rationalizes another person's experience without any sense of being with them in the experience.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's not witnessing and acknowledging.
Yeah.
And it's and I, as a psychologist, it took me years to realize that the reason I'd become a psychologist was so that I could feel in control. And that analyzing was my coping mechanism to not have to feel.
Analyzing was your coping mechanism so you wouldn't have to feel.
Yeah. So I stayed with people in their heads, and I'm really good at that. I can tell you why it's happened and where it's, I can do all of that. And it's only been because of my own health journey that I had to learn the value of being with people in their bodies, being with them through that process of feeling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you speak about that part of your journey?
Yeah. Okay. So let me start off with, I disconnected at a young age as well, because I didn't feel that there was anyone who was emotionally supporting me. It's not a conscious thing that I was aware of. But there was obviously on some level a feeling that I was alone, and that whatever I was experiencing was too much for me to manage on my own. And also noticing that those people around me couldn't tolerate emotions kind of gives one the message that, well, emotions are bad then, and I must avoid them. And so I grew up, and we were speaking about the Swiss elements in the family. Yeah, emotions are definitely not okay.
Yeah. For those that don't know, before we came on, we were talking to Kerry, and those who watch the show more often know that I have a prejudice towards the Swiss. And as Kerry said, was it one or both parents were from Switzerland?
My mother's side of the family.
So the mother was from, I made one of my jokes that Bambos kicks my leg when I make them, and talking about the emotional shutdown nature of the Swiss culture.
And he was claiming that his Swiss girlfriend would refuse to hold his hand
5 years
in public.
We could not hold hands in public because it might make other people feel uncomfortable.
How was love making?
So interesting.
Let's not talk about this on air.
Yeah. Because I could definitely analyze that. Yeah. So I was very disconnected, and I remember being tired from as far back as 12, 13 years old, going on a school trip and needing to have a nap one afternoon, and my friends were teasing me about it. And I think I've always been a person that feels very deeply. So it sounds weird. So I was both disconnected, but I also had the capacity to feel very deeply and be very empathic. So I'd had to disconnect to tolerate that and put other coping mechanisms in place. So anyway, I coped through life. I used to drink quite a lot of alcohol and party a lot. And I was a perfectionist. I still am. It's quite a hard thing to recover from. And worked really, really hard. So I worked hard, partied hard. Everything was done 130%. And complete. I actually call it the holding personality. I'll get back to that. But basically, I had battled a bit with feeling really tired before my children were born, and I'd been told by a doctor, it's just stress, you need to calm down. And of course he was right to some degree. But after my first child was born in 2013, that kind of new mom fatigue seemed to be on a completely different level from everyone else's fatigue. I mean, I felt like I was living in a fog where I was stumbling around, and I couldn't connect with anyone. I wasn't present in life. I didn't have enough energy to do more than one thing a day. And so I was kind of mind-numbingly going through the process of just keeping my child alive. I wasn't thriving. She wasn't thriving. And I was aware of not being able to give her the parenting that, of course, being such a perfectionist, I had this vision of the mother that I was going to be, attachment theory and so connected. And meanwhile, she was also mirroring all my deepest childhood wounds of not being met and me not being able to meet her. And it was a very crazy time. And finally, I actually received a diagnosis of adrenal fatigue syndrome. And I was very fortunate, because some people can go through a life for a long time with one of these, with fatigue, and be told it's all in their head, or that it's depression. That was another one. I had a doctor tell me it was depression. I said, listen, I am a psychologist. I know depression. Yes, I'm down, but I'm down because I'm so damn tired all the time. And this is physical, and he just didn't get it. My therapist didn't get it. And just like bearing in mind, I'd been in therapy on and off since I had started studying from 2007. So I'd been in quite a lot of therapy, but it had all been in my head. I'd done a lot of consciousness work of understanding why I was a bit controlling and a perfectionist, but I hadn't necessarily felt it or integrated it. So 2013, I received the diagnosis. So the first thing I did was was to try and fix it. And so I went and took all the right supplements and did all the right things. And I must say, I started to feel a fair bit better, and immediately went back to living my life at the level I'd lived it before I'd even had my daughter. And obviously I crashed very, very quickly soon after. And that was when it hit me that I actually, something has to change. Obviously, there's something that's not working here. But the problem was I was still so tired and still overwhelmed with this relatively new child who had reflux and barely slept as well, that I didn't have the capacity to get conscious about it. I was still just in survival mode. And so what actually happened was I ended up falling pregnant again 2 years, when my daughter was 18 months, which devastated me at the time, because I just didn't think I had the capacity for it, which I didn't have the capacity for, but somehow I made it through. So I crashed 4 times in 4 years. And the whole time I was aware that there's a body-mind connection here, and I'm not dealing with the whole picture. I didn't know who could help me with it, and I couldn't do it for myself. Now, this is the other part of it, was that I'm very good at doing things for myself. When we grow up not really having that emotional support, we become really capable at holding all of our shit together and trying to figure it all out and put things in place to make ourselves feel safe. And I just didn't. I have the capacity for that. I couldn't. And that was a good thing, because it opened me up to needing to actually get proper support. But what happened was, in 2017, I got to a point where because I had become more aware of my body, I could feel when I was going to crash. And it was usually after a period of sustained stress. I'd be in this wired state a lot of the time, where I couldn't sleep no matter how tired I was. I was constantly agitated, wired, and irritable. It was like having too much coffee all the time. And then my adrenaline would spike at times. So my heart would race. So my whole cortisol, adrenaline was all out of whack. And I knew I was going to crash soon. So I started putting things in place, waiting. And I tried to sort of slow things down gradually, because what tends to happen is that you're in that sustained stress, and then you have a holiday, or the stress ends, bam, you crash, because your adrenaline drops, and then you actually feel how absolutely depleted you are. So in that
by
case,
the way, I was in the state a lot of my life, and I'd get sick when I went on vacation.
Yeah.
Because that was when my body would shut down and finally heal itself. Yeah.
Exactly. It could finally stop being in fight-flight mode.
Yeah.
And at that point, because I had started to learn how to kind of modulate the crashes a little bit and read my body, I managed to stop it from being a massive crash. And I also somehow had the capacity to use it differently. And I had this realization that I had never truly felt safe in my life. And I'm not talking, and here I'm talking security as I belong, I am enough, I am wanted. that kind of way. And also, I am enough just the way I am. I don't have to be any different from who I am. I don't remember. So I must have at some point felt that, because as children, as babies, we're born beautifully divine, trusting beings who just love and trust the world and love ourselves and are deeply connected to ourselves. And then with the layering and the conditioning happens through, Gabor Mate says that that our personality is a sum total of our trauma adaptations. I'm certainly not paraphrasing it exactly the same, but it's along those lines. So when we feel that who we are is not enough, we are going to adapt ourselves to be loved, to be accepted, to be part of the tribe. And then that adapted version is who we think we truly are. And so then you have this misalignment between your truth and your adapted self. And that misalignment and that disconnect is what makes us unwell. And I finally realized that. So for the first time in 4 years, even though I had an awareness that my body's trying to tell me something, there's a message in this, I still was hating my body for it. And I was resentful of my situation. I just had this deep acceptance of, oh, okay, this is a massive opportunity for me right now to figure out how I've been doing life in a way that is absolutely exhausting me and that is not in alignment with my truth. And that was where things really started to shift, just even in the acceptance, because I was no longer resisting my experience. So I wasn't wasting so much energy on that. Yeah.
Yeah, when I'll talk about like my coaching work, and I'll bring this up a lot on the show, when I'm working with someone who hasn't gotten to the depths of the suffering that you're talking about, so there's no clear point at which they're now saying, okay, enough of this, then I spend my first few weeks making them even more miserable until they realize that they have to really fundamentally change something instead of continually manage it unwell.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so interesting you say that, because I practice this attachment parenting with my children, and my daughter hasn't been wanting to go to school. We've got a lot of changes in our life at the moment. So she's obviously got some anxiety, but she's not connected to it. So I just held this boundary, you will go to school, because that was the way to bring up the feeling. And she raged and raged and raged. So I had to hold that boundary for her so she could notice. Otherwise she would have run away from it. And she tried to push me away. She tried to run away out from where I was. We do. We'll run away if we can. Whatever our coping mechanisms are, whether we're running or fighting or freezing, disconnecting. Yeah.
I work closely with a program called Hand in Hand Parenting.
Yes. Well, that's exactly the parenting I use. Tasha Shaw and Patty Whipler.
Yeah, well, Patty was on this. She was on this show because she's a dear friend.
Yeah. Yes.
So,
okay.
So, and it's funny when you talk. The word in that program is called "stay listening."
Yes,
and,
that's what I was doing.
And it's funny because I've often found that it's one of the most profound tools that is used for kids, but actually, it's adults should be doing it, but we don't want to acknowledge that adults have unresolved emotions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, I was looking at my daughter at 9, having the amount of feeling she's having now, and thinking, imagine what most of us as adults have accumulated within ourselves that needs to be released like that.
Yeah. We had a show 2 days ago, was on what we called ambiguous loss.
Yeah.
And it was a theme that I felt like I wanted to give an hour to. And what I find interesting is that as adults, we still have difficulty mourning the loss of things that don't feel like as adults we can mourn that.
Yes.
And I wish more that there was almost a space, like when my wife is not well, like I'll go up to her and just hold her and let her grieve, even if she doesn't think that she's going to grieve yet. And it's in holding her and letting her know that she has the space to, that often the grief comes up. And I think a lot of times people don't kind of act proactively engage and say, hey, this is emotion that you just need to let go or let process. Yeah.
I work a lot with the masculine and feminine energies. So you're bringing to your wife the connected. So we know the patriarchal, disconnected masculine, which is very valued, and we're all really good at implementing that. You know, that's the striving, the doing, achieving, the kind of rational, linear focus. But the connected, ideally, we want the masculine to be connected and in devotion to the feminine, where the masculine in this case is the silence, the presence, and the acknowledgement, which then allows the feminine expression to arise and then gives shape to that and drive and then brings in the drive and the motivation, the clarity to express that. So they're actually together. So you're bringing your wife the container, the acknowledgement, which enables that feminine expression of her truth to be expressed, which is beautiful. And obviously most of us didn't have that masculine container when we grew up. Yeah.
Kelly, you mentioned you had 2 children.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, you didn't mention the partner, so I'm wondering,
Yes.
is the partner still around? And
he is. It feels like he doesn't feature that much. The children take up a lot of bandwidth.
How bad a parent is he?
He's not as conscious as I am. That makes it tricky. So we have different parenting styles, and we're working it out.
I love it.
I'm wondering how did he hold space for you like through the different facets you went through?
Oh, you mean through he is, do you know, he doesn't get it and he doesn't consciously understand it, but he'll be there, which is what I love about him. So he'll just, he does the devotion thing. And sometimes I wish he would be more on the same page as me and understand, but he doesn't necessarily, but he'll still be there. And that's amazing.
I like that.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
We've often said that, like, if a couple needs to stay together because they're the same, that's just such a shame, because it's the beauty is being very different and seeing that we also have values that are more important than our similarities, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. Today I was on a coaching call with a couple, and what I saw, the things that were triggering them, one was shutting down, one was reacting. So they were both doing fight and flight at different situations.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, wow, it doesn't actually make sense to work together as a trio, because I saw that I recognized it in my own journey, by the way. Like, if someone would shut down, they were regressing to a 5-year-old. And if he was running away, he was regressing to a 5-year-old. So in fact, they really had to take some space every time there was a trigger to work individually, and then they could come and hold the space together. But right now they can't do that.
Yeah. I once had a client who also in couples therapy who he was the one who he tended to do the regression much more than she did. She could hold the space and stay in her adult self a lot better. But the one day the second session after we discussed this, and he just couldn't hear it. He arrived with a bad boy shirt on. And I had to laugh. And he kind of defiantly came in with his bad boy shirts, like owning it. I'm the bad boy. It was really interesting. I find it fascinating how sometimes we unconsciously put it out there.
Yeah. I had something that came up as you spoke. I have a reoccurring theme in my life at the moment. And I really like being. Like, when I meet someone, I just treat them like they've been a friend for years. Like, I don't really think anyone is like, oh, I'm separate from you, I need the time to. And my playfulness is to laugh at life and celebrate everything with the greatest love. And what I noticed is that if individuals have not aligned in themselves and had that same area of spaciousness, they're intensely threatened by that level of comfort.
Yes, it's so true.
And it's happened a few times. So it's like a pattern. You know, the first time you're like, oh, 1 off, second time 2 up. Now you're like, wow, this is happening more often.
Are you not talking now about, so like what you're up against also is a person's personal history, and let's say you're a guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. So people also need to get to know you a little before they can let their guard down, right?
Exactly. That's the point, right? Yeah. There's a trauma response. So
Yeah.
being that open will generate a trauma response, because when you said something that cracked me up, I was like, oh, that's of course it, was that there is an idea of I need to be able to control the environment, the situation, and the individual. And if the other individual is that free, then I can't actually control them. And
Yes,
if I can't, and if I can't meet them in that freedom, all of a sudden I feel unsafe. And that's kind of
Yes.
what I've now seen.
I always feel it's also like, I'm not going to take responsibility for your feelings, so you now have to sit with them. Like, this is me. I'm not apologizing, and I'm not enmeshing myself with you in any way. I'm not taking on any of your stuff. So whatever you're feeling, that's yours.
Yeah.
And that's hard for people. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really hard for people. And I've often seen, as I've gotten older, I've not had space for them to not take responsibility for their feelings. Before, I would almost let them make it about us. I would play the game like, oh, like, I'm going to let you not see any of my intentions, the love and the beauty of just being together. I'm going to pretend like all your interpretations are correct, just so that we can act like we're kind of making a relationship. Now I'm like, no, zero tolerance. You can share with me how I made you feel, and I'll love to be with you there. But what I won't let you do is name an intention that I did, thinking that you can get control over the conversation if you shut me down, which I've seen happen now. It's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. When you say you don't have tolerance, it also comes with age. It also comes with, how much time do I have left on the planet? And no time for bullshit anymore.
Yeah,
right?
and I see it usually with like practitioners that are young females who have put themselves in a position where they actually have to keep the imposter syndrome alive. And instead of saying, hey, I know that I'm an imposter, like, I already know that. I don't need to, like, it's almost like you have to get old enough to see through your own bullshit.
Oh, yes, definitely. 40 was quite a life-changing moment for me. I really felt like that brought down the veils. I mean, they'd already been coming down in a big way, but somehow
how old
I
are
could
you?
own it. I'm 43 this year.
Get out of here.
She's hot. You're hot for 43. Please. 2 kids?
You're at least 28.
2 kids? I know.
Does
your husband know how well he's got it or not?
I hope so. I should probably remind him more often, right?
Give me his email. We're going to send him an email afterwards.
No, the last thing you need is a backlash. Kerry, I was also really touched when you said that you mentioned, I have never felt safe in life. I didn't feel a sense of belonging. I wanted to know that I was wanted and I was enough. And I had a similar discovery during COVID. I needed COVID for me to get the insight with my relationship to money, that I wasn't worthy of life if I, as a man, if I couldn't sustain myself.
Yeah.
So this really touched me.
It's so fascinating because my husband hasn't had an income since, his income was cut in July and he hasn't had an income since November. So we are in a situation, which is partly why my children are battling so much now, where we're having to sell our home and move. So money is a big, big focus in our lives right now. And I've been watching a lot of things on abundance, which is very much in alignment with this whole masculine and feminine, is that feminine is that allowing of life and trusting that she's got you,
Surrender.
And so the deep, deep surrender. And the beliefs that I have attached to money as well. Wow. And the biggest one that came up for me last week was, I'm afraid money will abandon me, so I don't want to receive it. Yeah. So much of it is attached again to those childhood belief systems that are related to our caregivers and security, as you say, and then money kind of steps in as that. Yeah.
We can strongly recommend Peter Koenig.
Okay.
He's been on our podcast also.
He's probably one of the only people that live in Switzerland that I'd recommend that you get in contact with. Yes. Sweetheart of a man. He's done money work for at least 30 years. It's a very grounded practice, which is so practical and easy that, and he's so not in any way, whatever the typical word spiritual would be, that it's almost, it's laughable how much insight there is without any hang up. So it's really beautiful to spend time with
Definitely
him.
look into him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, when you brought on, you know, you can't just throw out Gabor Mate. I don't know if that's the correct pronunciation of his first name. Gabor Mate. Like, we both saw, I sent you a link to the show.
No, I sent you a link to the show.
Did you?
Yeah.
Oh, someone sent me a link and I thought it
Yeah,
sent
they
to
just
you.
recently was a series.
Yeah, but the first show of it was the one that kind of got distributed widely. And I sent you the link to the show. Are you trying to make me think I'm insane? What are you doing? Oh my God.
Playing with your old age, Andy.
So like I'm playing back. I'm like, I saw this. I said, I've almost never told him he has to watch something. And I said, you have to watch this.
Yeah.
Because it was
powerful.
that powerful. And when you said trauma adaptation, and that felt so beautiful in the sense that when I look at my life through the lens of what is the trauma that I had to adapt to in order to receive what I was needing but not getting.
Yes.
And then I can look at all of my behavior going back from my emotionally abusive dad and really see my life through that lens and understand everything I became talented at, quite honestly. Because it's not even the negative. It's like to adapt, you become more effective and efficient. So I was a really good manager because I could anticipate everything that was going to go wrong. Because as a kid, I need to anticipate anything that could go wrong with my dad. I just applied it into a business setting.
Yeah. So what I found is that people burn out when they apply that in an unconscious way and to an extreme.
Yeah.
So
would you say yours was unconscious back then?
For sure.
But Andy didn't burn out.
I did burn out at that time. Of course, I burnt out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Before I was conscious, as Kerry's saying. Yeah.
Continue.
Yeah.
Kerry.
Yeah. No. So it's exactly that, and you know, you see these So I work with women particularly who are extremely capable and very, very good at what they do and very responsible, and they can't believe that is a bad thing because that's just always how they've been, and it served them because it's valued in our society. So it's really hard to let it go. But I said, well, it's not about letting it go. It's about being connected when you do that. So it's tuning in again to that masculine and feminine. So bringing in that masculine, but in connection with the feminine. Does it feel right in your body? Does it flow? We're talking about flow. It's just so, wow, that's been such an important part of my life in the last couple of years as well. It's just, if it's hard, if it feels hard, then it's probably not right.
Yeah. I remembered when, just to go back to the subject of the conscious unconscious moment, I remember there was a flash. I saw myself walking up the stairs as a kid, living in fear that my dad would just flip, because he'd flip for no reasons as a kid. And I remembered when I saw how that translated into everything that I did that made me successful in life, I called my dad to share with him what the consequence was of him behaving that way. And it was kind of it was totally vulnerable, because there was no blame, but there was not pretending that him being bipolar and screaming and shouting for whatever appeared no apparent reason didn't have an impact on me.
Yeah.
And he actually said something that freaked me out, because I told him how it was. And then he finished the story by saying, and you would have never known when it was going to happen, which showed me that he was conscious. That he was conscious, that was also something that he was struggling with. And
as far as that was
it.
I was going to say, as far as I know with bipolar, is that often as people get older, they do, I don't want to say grow out of it, but it becomes milder, and there does tend to be, the capacity to have more consciousness. And as you said, so that's amazing that happened.
Yeah.
And it's such a gift. It's such a gift to be given that acknowledgement, no matter how old you are. That recognition and acknowledgement, makes you realize you weren't going crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Andy wrote 2 books, and in one of the books he mentions if his father took medication, he was not feeling good, and when he wasn't taking the medication, everyone around him wasn't feeling good.
Yeah. So- Yeah.
Go on.
I was going to say, you talk about the power thing, as when you're discussing at the beginning, and that thing about everyone else out there is a problem. And I can't remember how you said it. It's like you're giving away your creativity, but actually you're giving away your creativity, but you're giving away your power to everyone else and everything else. And I think that for me, my journey was the realization that the pills and the diet and all the stuff out there wasn't going to make it better for me. And no matter how many doctors I went to, it wasn't going to make it better. That's why I kept crashing, is I had to work out that it was in here that I had to start and take ownership.
How did that actually look like, the going inside? What was it for you?
So it's so hard because I've been doing embodiment practices for a while now, but back then I suppose, even then I was doing something it's a tool called focusing, where I would feel the physical sensation of the experience in my body and just imagine pulling up a chair alongside it and observing it without any judgments and without needing to fix it, and just observing it and allowing it to be there, and then seeing what unfolded and oftentimes it would then release and there'd be something underneath, and release and there'd be something underneath. And then when I started doing the masculine and feminine work, I now do that with bringing in the divine masculine to hold the space for me like a container, the emptiness, stillness, and silence, and then allowing the emotional and physical sensations to be present and just embracing them with compassion. And then just getting the knowing from that, the deep sort of knowing of that.
This kind of connects very much with the second book. Is called Bambos Likes to Pick Up the Book, so I'm going to embrace this moment.
He doesn't like it. He's been resisting.
But the Wounded Healer is in the book. What I highlight is basically a practice where I invite people to share the thing that's what's hardest to say, acknowledge, or admit to themselves, and then follow that up with "and it's fucking great." And so
Powerful.
and basically it's a narrative of, say, 20 archetypes that went through that process. And what the thing that I see is it's very much aligned with what I heard you just say, is that there is a making peace with a state without needing to fix, solve, or do anything with it. And I see we have a group on Facebook where it's just a hashtag and it's fucking great. That's the group. And what I've seen, how much people will struggle who come into the group that think that things that need to be discussed, solved, fixed. We need to discuss how to help you. And I see these people get really triggered by the group because they feel like the individual isn't being taken care of.
They're not
that
being rescuing tendency.
Say again.
A rescuing tendency, the savior complex.
Caretaker.
And and the group has gotten like harsh criticism because there isn't enough, like, what this is useless. That's the statements we've had. This serves no function.
There needs to be a solution. There needs to be a practical solution. We need to have ticked that box and said it's done. And then we can feel better about ourselves.
Have you even been told the group is irresponsible because if someone shares that level of vulnerability, because they feel safe and comfortable because no one's going to say anything, that they're even more vulnerable than they'd be in another group. And yet the individuals, because they feel like that level of vulnerability needs to be caretaken, because there's something that it's been a fascinating, that's been one of the more challenging situations for me, because I also don't want to caretake the individual who's made this statement. And my preference is this person appears to not be comfortable with what I said, and it's fucking great. That would be, but that would trigger that other person who doesn't understand the group's intention.
Yes, I get it. Wow. Yeah, I mean, the savior complex has been very strong in me, and that goes back to what I was saying about the holding personality. is that when I realized all that about myself, about how I'd never felt secure, and had put all these coping mechanisms in place, and of course one of them also was to try and fix everything and to try and help my mom and dad, because I had an awareness that they weren't okay. And unfortunately, I've also come to realize is it wasn't really altruistic, is I actually needed them to be okay so I would be okay. And so I became, like you mentioned, Andy, I became very aware of very tuned into the nuances of their moods and whatnot. And it made me a really good caretaker and rescuer. And then, of course, becoming a therapist was just an extension of that, but it was also to help me to feel in control, like I mentioned. And it's all part of that, holding it all together, holding all those high expectations for themselves, holding so much on, of everyone else's stuff as well. And then having to learn to let that go is really, really hard. And I still find that I like to be a person who is in the know and who likes to tell other people, I can definitely fall in that trap, and at least I can see myself do it now when I do it.
Yeah.
Which is better than unconsciously doing it.
No, totally. Yeah. You said something a moment ago that also brought up some feelings. When I was in college, I went a year away to Australia, and my best friend's father was a priest.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember him, like, one of the things he said that stayed with me my entire life concerning my dad is he said, when you're angry at someone, you don't realize what power they have over you.
Yes.
And it was weird at that time because I didn't look at what I was giving away, like you mentioned, all the creativity and the comfort and the security. And it's interesting because nowadays when someone sends a really shitty email to somebody and they forward it to me, like, I'm always laughing because I'm like, my God, look at the power you have over this person. If they're that pissed off, Jesus, you're like in their head. Yeah. And I realized that if they react to it, then that person is in their head. So it's like the game is, once you bite, you're stuck. So you actually have to see that suffering isn't there for you to own. It's their suffering. It goes back to where we started this conversation. But I just see that anger is one of these things. Bambos had a bit of an earlier situation where some anger came up from somebody else. And I saw how hard it was to allow it to be without having to actually caretake or do anything with it. Yeah.
Anger is one of the most hard emotions to not need to fix for someone else, because it is so triggering, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's helped me to remember that underneath all anger is fear. And that, I mean, I don't know if you'd agree with that. That's something
suffering.
The person is very wounded. It specifically has helped me with a lot of the political changes, and there's been so much hurt and rage through the last couple of years, right? And just to be able to meet people where they're at and not be shut down by their anger, I always just try to tune into that part underneath that's just really, really hurting. Yeah.
I've often found anger to be one of the greatest expressions of love when I've experienced it. In a way, because I see how I framed it in my life today, as I'm like, wow, this person is so helpless. This is the only way they can express themselves, and this is the most vulnerable way for them to be.
Yeah.
And then, of course, what comes up for me is my dad. So I might have sadness, or because I can feel the 10-year-old in my head who is so uncomfortable with dad yelling at him. But I also have love for that 10-year-old in myself as well. So it's sort of it's been able to balance itself out in time.
Yeah.
I love how you explain that.
Yeah.
Kerry, I want to go a little bit to the beginning, because something also touched me. You talked about when you had your daughter was your first, right? Yeah. And so you had parents that were emotionally shut, not available. And all of a sudden you have a child, and you mentioned you had this vision of how it was going to be. When you were talking, I was kind of thinking, it would be the opposite of what your parents had given you, of course.
Absolutely. I was needing to compromise.
Yeah. And all of
yeah.
a sudden you couldn't live up to that image in your mind. And I'm wondering, how did that land for the two of you?
For me and my daughter.
Yeah.
So firstly, let me actually say something that is very interesting, because I think it's a part of what I'm battling with my daughter right now, is that I had the desire to have a home birth so that she would be with me constantly. She wouldn't be taken from me. There would be attachment. And being the perfectionist I was, obviously nothing worked out according to plan. And obviously I needed that experience, and I see that in hindsight. But I ended up in hospital, and I actually ended up in ICU. And so she was taken from me, and she was put in a nursery. Actually, the nursery was being renovated, so she was put in the NICU at that point, the neonatal ICU. And they forgot to even label her, so they didn't know who she belonged to. So now she was separated from me and unnamed. And then they brought her to me once to feed, I think, at some point. And then when I was allowed into the ward again, I was so absolutely exhausted. She just wanted to suckle a nurse repeatedly, which I now understand was her desire to repair that lack of connection. And I was terrified I was going to fall asleep and, hurt her or something. So eventually the nurses actually took her again and gave her a dummy and to put her in the nursery so I could get some sleep. And I think that was probably the beginning of the downfall of my image of myself. And again, I do see why it had to happen, because I had to experience the absolute opposite of it to kind of learn to hold all of that in myself and know that it is okay to not be perfect. So that abandonment wound was set up in her that I had in me, and that I'd so badly been wanting to prevent her from having. And then because of my experience, I think it led hugely to my fatigue as well. I couldn't then be present for her. And the more I wasn't present, the more she needed me. So there was that dynamic of her really like the grasping and me actually feeling in myself resentful, which was really hard. But I have to admit, there were times where I couldn't cope. I couldn't cope with it. I was so tired. And so I had these two parts, where this one part is saying, you need to be there for her all the time. You need to hold whatever's going on for her. You need to be, you should. And there's this other part that's saying, I can't. I just can't do it. And what's wrong with you? You're a terrible mother. Oh, and of course, the big part is this is going to affect her later in life.
Yeah.
And I've had to also learn to say her story is not my story. Her story is not my, and she's chosen the story. This is her life that she's having for whatever reason. And I'm playing my role for whatever reason. And I'm doing the best I can. But yeah, it was really, really hard in those early years. And I feel like a big piece of what's going on with her right now, with us needing to move and her leaving her friends, is this abandonment wound is coming up. And I'm having to hold it for her again. It's like she's saying, I need you to stay here with me, and I'm going to push you away, but I need you to stay. So it's almost like we've come full circle.
I heard the baby crying in the background, by the way. Do you need to
No,
take
I
care
think
of
you
anything?
heard there were some birds that flew over. I think that might have been what you heard. Yeah.
Well,
yeah. No, my husband's got them. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that.
It's a pleasure.
I have 2 words: fucking intense. Not only like I felt the responsibility for another human being, and also how it was impacting you, having the label mother and everything that's projecting onto it, and having to let go.
Yes.
Wow, there's so much in that.
Yeah, I love that you've been able to see in reverse how wonderful the story has been, and what it, like the fact that you didn't get to have the perfect birth, and you didn't get to have the dream of this and the dream of that. Like there's a beauty in your journey, and that is almost seen in reverse as, wow, these are the lessons I really needed to have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's still hard for me to know that she had to go through them too. Like I would have wanted to have protected that, and that's that rescuing tendency.
Yeah.
And then trusting that this is how it needed to be for her. I don't know why.
Yeah.
And I can always be there to support her as she grapples with that in the future, but it's her journey.
Yeah.
And that's something that as a parent is still very difficult for me to do. Yeah.
You know, the one thing I noticed, I mentioned the practice that I did when I did this tour through the US with the hashtag, and it's fucking great.
The Tarot's called The Last Letter, by the way.
For those
The
interested,
other book.
the
Wonderful. I'm going to be looking into those.
the thing that was actually the hardest for people to say of all of the things which I saw, which would touch like the deepest pain, was that I'm not a good mother.
Oh my gosh.
And it's okay.
A friend of mine says that they take the baby out and they put mother's guilt in.
Yeah.
It's real. Very, very, very real.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, the only the responsibility that we have as parents is actually to give it to ourselves and live that by example.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I was talking to a couple where they weren't getting along, and they were basically not getting along in front of the child.
Yeah.
And they kept saying that they needed to stay together because they wanted the child to have lived with both parents. And I kept thinking to myself, hold on, so you're modeling exactly the behavior that you would not want for your child when they're raised, but you got to stay together. Like, imagine if both of you were really happy independently of one another, and that's what the child was raised and got to see. Like, isn't that also an appealing picture? You know, there was just a funny moment of the fact that there was such an image that they needed to be together, because even if they yelled and screamed in front of the kids, that's still better than if they were to separate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
God forbid that we're happy.
Yeah. God forbid we're happy. Yeah.
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 That's another interesting theme I've really seen coming up lately, is allowing ourselves to have happiness and goodness and feeling worthy of that. It's been an interesting one as well. It's been quite present in you know how you attract people into your life, particularly with me, with my clients who are mirroring back the same sort of experience, and I'm just seeing it coming up time and again. It's okay to be happy. It's not going to be taken away, or whatever that fear is. Yeah.
I recognize that so well in my own life. Specifically to happiness and finances. I was even afraid to celebrate when money was flowing, because I didn't trust that it would stay long enough on my bank account.
That's it. That's what I've been working with. Yeah.
Well, for me, the moment I allowed myself to celebrate and name it, and it somehow is sitting on my bank account now. And it's not because I'm not spending, it's just because it's just flowing in.
Yeah. Yeah. It is so fascinating, the whole energetic flow with money, and how deeply tied to our worth it is, and our beliefs about life.
And Andy always says there's two issues in every person: sex and money.
Those are the hardest ones to bring onto the show, because there's so many hangups when it comes to sex and money, that like to discuss them on air, it always gets a little bit more sensitive.
Yeah. Of course.
Absolutely. And we even had one show we didn't do because we didn't trust the guest was going to be able to handle themselves properly.
Was that?
I don't want to talk about this.
2 weeks ago.
2 weeks ago.
Yeah, 2 weeks ago.
I find, and this happened with you as well, that I'll celebrate my clients' lives more than they celebrate their lives. Because in a way, I have a balance sheet. Like, I know where we began and where we came to, and I see a behavior. Like, I'm so. I'm like looking at the nano moments of what the behavior was at one moment compared to another moment. Yeah. And those are, so when someone changes, I'm like, wow, like, I don't care if you say, thank you, I love what I learned. Like, that doesn't interest me at all. But when I see a change in behavior that's so contrary to what you were in a month or two, that's where I get like great joy. And the individual often doesn't realize it themselves because it just happened naturally.
Yeah.
Through osmosis.
Yeah. So I always celebrate that.
Isn't that why witnessing each other is so important?
Yeah.
So we can see ourselves in the eyes of each
surrounding
other.
yourself with people that model the behavior that you want to model,
Yes,
or
yes.
reading this book 30 times.
Bambo's read both books like over 15 times. And,
Wow.
and he read them, we're going to say it over and over again, not because he actually was going to learn something new, but it was through the resonance of reading it and starting to feel into what it would feel like to bring that more into his own life. I'm saying that on your behalf. I'm defensively saying that on your behalf.
Yeah, there's a way of being in how he writes and how he responds to different situations in life, which I recognize in my own life. And I'm like, oh, I would love to respond to these things myself in that way. So in a way, by reading and kind of meditating in it and feeling, oh, wow, it becomes an osmosis, it becomes a way of being also. So it is not only a mental thing, but just an embodied.
Yeah. And I imagine that you probably create new neural pathways every time that you're reading it. The new neural pathways connected to the feeling of it as well.
I have to say, I have another book right now, which is not Andy's, that I think I've listened to 30 times now, and it's I'm a badass at making money.
I think I need that one.
Oh, I've got the audio book, and I just listen to it on loudspeaker at 5 a.m. when I'm training in the park, and sometimes people are running and I can see them like looking and listening awkward moments of the audiobook. I'm like, yeah, this is what we're doing today, guys.
I'm a badass at making money. Do you have the author of that book? We got to get that person on the show, Bambo.
Jen Sincero.
Yeah, we should bring them on.
And she curses in her book, and I love it.
That's
really, it's fun. It's really raw.
Yeah.
I can't hold up that book, guys. Sorry.
No.
Well,
go ahead.
We have come to the end of our hour.
Yeah.
Is there anything else?
That's going to ask the same thing. Is there anything else from your side that we haven't discussed that you thought would be nice to share? Things, people that might be interested in following up with you directly, where would they find you if you wanted to meet anybody?
I just wanted to say one thing, though, is I've noticed that this time is really an amazingly opportune time to start facing ourselves. And it's like all of our shit's being stirred up in such a big way. And we even had to all get locked up and, with ourselves to have to face ourselves. And all the old systems and structures are falling away. It's actually, again, for me, it was like that moment with the adrenal fatigue. It's like you can either resist it and hate it, or you can say, gosh, look at the gift in this, and what can I do about it, and what can I do with it? That's been pretty amazing for my clients, for me as well.
Yeah, the gift of COVID.
You and I, yourself and the guest from yesterday, different but same.
Yeah, we had a very similar show on yesterday. A lot of adrenal fatigue and trying to overcome and learn how to move through it, right?
Anxiety and stress.
Yeah. The one thing you said, which we didn't touch on, but it's an important distinction in my life, and I use it for everything. In fact, I used it 2 or 3 days ago with a client, was they did an action that was unconscious, and I said, no, we're not going to do it until you're conscious of where it's coming from. And then a week later, they did the same thing, but now I said, okay, great. And they were confused. They said, Andy, they were a bit resentful to me. Like they said, Andy, I'm doing the same thing I would have done a week ago. And I laughed and I said, yeah, but what state are you doing it in now? And then they started to chuckle because they realized that it was all reactive before, and now they were fully grounded in whatever the experience was going to be.
Yes.
And it's a slight nuance, but it's so important because if you're not in that state and you're acting, then basically everything is arbitrary. It is still arbitrary, but at least you're feeling what you're doing and why you're doing it, which means you can respond to to what comes back more consciously.
Yeah.
So how was that? Leaving on that note.
Thank you, Kerry. It was a pleasure having you with us.
Yes, thank you for being with us.
It was so much. Thanks so much for having me. It was lovely to chat to you both, and thanks for the work you're doing. It sounds awesome.
Yeah, we make trouble wherever we can. We send you a hug. Yeah.
Bye from Amsterdam.
Bye. Take care.
You too. Yeah, we usually pick themes for a week.
Coincidentally,
this week feels like stress and anxiety, and how we've turned it into a pathway to making peace with ourselves. Yeah.
Like I kind of had this meta level experience because when we have these weekly shows and maybe there's a common denominator, the wording that you'll use a lot of the times is the same.
Yeah.
So in a way, I was just laughing like, oh yeah, it's the same principle.
What did you hear me say today that I said
Oh,
yesterday?
just this last part when you talked about the guy that was doing an action from reactiveness and then again from connectedness.
Yeah.
Like I love that theme.
Yeah.
It's not how you do it, it's the intention with how we do things.
Yeah. It got to where I was frustrated with you before we got on the show.
Thanks, Andy.
Which we're not going to talk about on the show anyway. Our audio engineer said, Andy, just keep any mentoring work offline. You don't need to discuss it online.
Tomorrow,
Bambos is going to look on the phone to see if he can pull up what the show is tomorrow.
Because now I'm curious if tomorrow is the same.
Yeah, exactly. Do we have another I Overcame Anxiety show, or what's our show tomorrow?
Growing up? No, that tomorrow is strip clubs.
I love how you start.
Strip clubs, toxic relationships, and depression with...
I don't know who that's with, but just the title alone is just the reason to join us. We'll see you tomorrow on
a wonderful
chaos. We fight to find peace, the head and the heart.